Hey guys, what's up? Unrested back again. Sorry I didn't have a full video for you last week. I just did some streaming instead. There's just going to be some weeks where I just decide to do that. Don't worry, this isn't going to become any kind of gaming channel, but I do need the footage because I'm putting some of that up on my secondary channel. It's just called Scott Ackerman right now. I'm also working on a visual novel game, which I'm almost about halfway through completing, which I'm kind of surprised, but I've been staying concentrated on that and to kind of learn the whole VN atmosphere better. I'm playing a couple visual novels myself, streaming it just so I have a little bit of time to chat to you guys, the viewers. That's a lot of fun for me. I find it to be very cathartic when I can just sit down and talk to you guys. A lot of times, you guys are the only outlet I have for getting a lot of quote unquote English feelings out. So, what are we going to talk about today with my English feelings? And when I say English feelings, I just mean talking about how I feel in English, something I don't get to do much in Japan. Um, and I wanted to probably cover the topic of acceptance. One of the kind of strange questions I always get asked, and I guess maybe it's not so strange if you've never lived here in Japan before, but a lot of people always ask me, "Aren't you upset that you'll never be accepted as a Japanese person?" Um, and to that I say, why would I be? Number one, I have absolutely no Japanese blood in me. I have no Japanese heritage. I have no Asian heritage in general. Why would I suddenly be accepted as a Japanese person? Even if I changed my name to a Japanese person's name and got my citizenship, something I'll probably never do because I don't see a point. Um, I have permanent residency in Japan, something I've talked about a million times before, and that's pretty much good enough for me. I can retain my American passport, but I can come and go from Japan as I please without getting going and leaving visas. I can stay as long as I want, work any job I want. I suppose if I wanted to get married, get divorced and get married again, I could do that too. So I like it gives me enough freedom that I'm happy with what it is. And to become a citizen, I've heard you do have to give up your American citizenship, but it's something neither country is very strict on, so you probably could keep it. But I just really I don't see the point. I don't see the point of becoming a Japanese citizen, especially due to the fact that yes, I will never be accepted as a Japanese person. Now, what would that entitle to be quote unquote accepted as a Japanese person? Well, that would mean anytime I'm part of any kind of social clique or work environment, I would be treated in the same way every other Japanese person would be. I'd be seen as a Japanese person. I would only speak in Japanese. I would know all the quirks and manners of how you would act in each social setting, and I would be expected to know and act in accordance to all the rules and societal norms that Japanese have. And let me tell you, there's a lot of them, and that's kind of why I'm happy I'll never be accepted. It's kind of a situation of doing the best with what you're given. There would probably be some advantages to being accepted as a Japanese person, like maybe more job options would be open to me, maybe more invites to do certain conferences and lessons and all different types of things like that would be open to me. There would even be some things I can only apply for. For example, I would definitely get more pension if I was registered as a Japanese person. So there is benefits. I'm not saying it's not worth somebody's time to try and be accepted. But then with acting and assimilating into Japanese society, my looks will never fit. And I know that seems petty to especially us Americans who we try to accept almost every race possible if we can, aside from those very few. Well, maybe there's a lot. I don't know really. I don't know the whole temperature of America these days and how things are going, but I know when I lived there, I tried to be as accepting as I could of anybody and everybody I ever met. In Japan, I will always just be seen as a gaijin. There's no way around that. I mean, aside from, I guess, getting very proactive plastic surgery, there's no way I'm going to change this face into looking anything but the most gaijin face ever in Japan. I've got blue eyes, I've got white skin, I've got freckles. My hair, when it grows out, is a different color than the normal color. And it's to the point where people ask me if my hair and my eyes are fake or if it's my real one. And when they find out it's my real one, they're like, wow, I can't believe how different it is. I will never be accepted. What are some downsides to that? Okay, well, for number one, we are considered unpredictable in general as Gaijin, not because we're erratic or crazy or we express more emotion than is what is average in Japan. It's just because we did not grow up here as kids. We did not live our full life out here as kids. And that changes a lot. There are so many idiosyncrasies of how you interact with a Japanese person that you would not learn unless you grew up out here. Even me, 11 years later, after living here for so long, there are some things I still haven't picked up on yet, or how to act in certain situations, what questions are okay to ask, what things you can bring up, how to act when a certain tragedy has happened to you or your family, when you should keep smiling when you're finally allowed to show tears, and all types of things like that. I'm very happy that I don't have to follow those social pressures, so that I can kind of be whoever I truly am IRL all of the time. At times there are still points where I do need to suppress my emotion to properly fit in. For example, any type of anger is really not looked upon too kindly in Japan. Exploding with anger, even when it's justified, for example, if someone was extremely rude to you or you received incredibly bad customer service, people still don't expect you to explode in anger. And there has been times where I have finally let the shit hit the fan. And over time, I would say I have become a calmer person. My reactions are more calm, but it's still a side of me that is very gaijin, my emotional reactions to things, especially if my family is treated bad in any which way. For example, recently I hired a flyer company to hand out flyers for my company, and they kind of tried to pull a fast one on me and tell me they did the job when it appears almost none of the flyers get handed out. And the reason I know that is because I'm friends with people who live in apartment complexes near me. Now, when you ask for flyers to be put out, you usually do it like in a circumference, in a radius, and I only choose like 1 kilometer from my location of business, which is literally 5 minutes from where I live. So I can go out and talk to anybody who's in an apartment near me and know that they should have gotten a flyer. Well, pretty much everybody I talked to didn't get any flyers from my business at all. So I knew which apartments they had hit and which apartments they hadn't. There was over 6 different apartment friends I asked who did not get the flyers. And so I had to call that company and ask them why I was paying the same amount and price for way less apartments getting flyers. And yeah, they weren't too happy about that. Whereas most Japanese would probably just be like, oh, I see. Okay, well, let me just use another company later. They won't even say, I'm going to go use another company. They would just like quit their business with them kind of silently and not really throw too many complaints their way. Whereas I called and I raged. Should I have done that? Should I not have done it? Personally, I felt like I should have, because it was my money on the line and my business on the line. And I took it very personal, as being lazy for a job I paid for. But most Japanese wouldn't do that. So there are times where I'm still very happy I get to use my gaijin-esque emotional outlashing and stuff like that. But there's other times where it's very hard. For example, there's certain parts where I've been to at funerals where it's very sad, and I've almost wanted to cry in public, but I see that almost nobody's crying, or at least none of the men are. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable here by crying. There's been movies I've gone to that are very sad, where I think either it's lost in translation or whatever the Japanese people see, it doesn't quite tell them the same story. So there's been times where I've wanted to cry for those parts, and there's been times where I want to laugh out loud, and I end up being the only person in the audience who laughs quite loud, because either the joke was a play on words that doesn't translate, it was a callback to some sort of nostalgic media that was never in Japan, so the joke lands flat, and I'm kind of seen as like this foolish guy, like laughing or crying at parts of movies that don't make cultural sense to Japanese people. Now, that's not in any way trying to be offensive to their level of cultural sense. Their cultural senses are on par with their own culture. I can't expect them to understand callbacks to media they never saw as a child, just like they probably don't expect me to either. If somebody makes a joke about like the Smurfs or the Simpsons, it's not going to go over big in Japan because they've never watched those shows for the most part. Now, of course, there's an exception to every rule that I'm saying. I'm sure there is a Japanese person out there that is a Smurf otaku, but for the most part, you wouldn't expect that. Just like for me, if there was some kind of joke that referenced a very old cartoon like Gegege no Kitaro, I probably wouldn't laugh either because I don't know a lot about that, aside from the fact that the artist had one arm. And it was about obake and monsters and stuff. So there are crossovers there where emotions, references, and nostalgia don't transfer. Now, those, for the most part, I mean, they don't really cause a big problem. But for example, one time where I felt very uncomfortable and I didn't really know how to react was when we ran into a family friend on the street, and he had to tell us about how his wife and his daughter had just died. The whole time he did it, he smiled, and you could hear sadness in his voice, and I wanted to like really feel sorry for him. Wish him the best, tell him, you can talk to me, and have him cry on my shoulder. But for Japan, that just wasn't the right situation. You wouldn't do that for his situation. He smiled while he told me, and he made not really a joke, but he jested that all the women in his life were leaving because they couldn't stand to be around him. So he used himself as a deprecating joke to just kind of turn the mood. But at the same time, I felt horrible for this guy. And I know he was just handling it the best way he knew how he could in the Japanese culture. That's not to say they handle death and things harsh like that. It's just that because we knew him from a business we had gone to before, a restaurant that we had gone to that he owned, he knew that because we weren't close family friends, he could not show true emotion around us because that's kind of not normal in Japan. Whereas as a gaijin in America, if I was merely a restaurant owner that you knew and I talked to you about how my wife died and I started crying, you would just feel sorry for me. You wouldn't be like, oh man, don't cry now, dude. Like, this is a business relationship. Like, nobody would do that to me. So there are some harsh aspects of that, and there are some good aspects of that. For example, one thing that a lot of people complain about with Japan, but I see it keep their culture and their attitudes very much so intact, is the fact that they don't allow a lot of immigration over here. I think last year America took in something like 33,000 refugees. I'm not 100% sure on those numbers, but it was at high thousands, and Japan took in 3. I think it was like 3 asylum refugees. And people complain about that. They say, why doesn't Japan take more people? But once again, you got to remember that Japan is trying to keep their culture its own culture. It's been a very indigenous culture for over 1,000 years now. They've stuck to their own. They've kept a lot of their stuff intact, whereas America, we've kind of spread out to all different variations of culture, and there isn't one sort of culture that dominates all anymore. Whether that's good or bad is completely up to your own subjective opinion. Personally, I like the way America handles it. I like seeing many different faces, different colors, different people, different races, different traditions, and different backgrounds. Whereas Japan, I know if I see a Japanese person, they're going to be a Japanese person with a very typical Japanese upbringing. And that has been kept intact due to the fact that they have been so strict on policy. One thing I am a little bit worried about with all this clashing together is going to be the 2020 Olympics, when you're going to have a multitude of traditions, cultures, and races come to Japan to compete. How will Japan handle it? Well, if I were to offer any advice to Japanese people in general, I would say the biggest things you need to get rid of are a lot of the very old mannerisms that no longer work as far as interactions with gaijin. For example, Japan needs to stop telling gaijin, wow, you're really good at using chopsticks. I can't believe you use chopsticks. That's a really common thing Japanese people say. For the most part, it's the older generation that says it. You don't really hear a lot of teenagers or college-age kids saying stuff like that. At this point in our world, there's Japanese, Chinese, and every other type of Asian restaurant everywhere in the world. Almost everybody knows how to use chopsticks worldwide. So to say, wow, I can't believe you can use chopsticks, you're so good at using them, it's almost kind of an insult at this point. I think I learned how to use them when I was 4 years old at I believe it was Epcot, eating at the Japanese-style restaurant that they had at the Tour of the World series. So it's not that odd that we come here knowing how to use chopsticks. Now, can we use it as good as you Japanese people? Not always. It took me a while to build up some strength to be able to like cut potatoes and stuff like that with chopsticks. Another thing is, if we're not good at Japanese, you don't have to tell us we're good at Japanese. I know they do it because they're nice people. I know they do it because they're very polite and they want to make people feel welcome. But if we're shit at Japanese, you can just say, hey, I see you're trying to speak some Japanese, ganbatte. You know, just do your best, try hard, okay? But you don't need to be like, Nihongo wa jouzu, jouzu, when the person can only say like, watashi wa sukatta desu, okay? Like, it's okay. It's okay. We know when we're not good. You don't have to patronize. It's okay. I guess other things is pretty much bodily appearance. It's not really good to ask if nantoka is somebody's real nantoka. For example, if you see a person with very different eyes or hair than you, it doesn't sound good to ask them if that's their real hair or their real eyes. I realize colored contacts are a thing that people use in Japan. I realize people dye their hair, and there usually is one natural hair color in Japan. But you're having an invitation to all nations where hair, height, size, color, everything is going to be different. You should just assume it's different unless they tell you otherwise. Unless they say, yeah, do you like my new color of hair or whatever? Just say, I like your hair, or just say, I like your eyes. If that's what you really want to appreciate it, just tell them what you like about it. Don't ask them, is it real? That's something, personally, I don't take offense to it because I've heard it so many times, I just kind of laugh at it. I'm like, okay. And there's another little small aspect I want to call innocent racism. Innocent racism. It's people who say things that sound racist but don't even know that it sounds racist. For example, some of my black friends, Japanese people will ask to touch their hair. Can I touch your hair and see how that feels? Like, yeah, you could do that, and most of my black friends who have lived here a long time understand why Japanese people do that. But when you're going to have newbies to your nation, maybe don't try that one out. I guess the way people dress, don't tell them that they look like a certain character because of a way they dress, or that, like, ask them if there is some special occasion why they're dressed that way. Sometimes it's just the way they dress for their country, and that's normal. I've seen people ask people wearing a scarf around their head, is that like some sort of Halloween costume? Or are you dressed up for a convention? Just assume that that's part of whatever their culture is. I think the biggest thing you can do is just change any question you're going to have as to the relevancy or if it's real or not aspect of a person's demeanor, is just to tell them what you like. I think that's probably the best thing to do. If you see somebody with something you totally don't understand, you could say, I really like that. What do you call that? I really like that. Where did you get that from? And most likely they will tell you the story behind it. Of course, if you're good friends with the person, you can say some of the quote-unquote innocent racist stuff that I've said before, because usually they'll understand or know that something's lost in translation. My next thing I'd like to say is just, you need to probably cancel out a lot of no tattoo things that you have going still with the onsens. I understand why Japan has a no tattoo policy for a lot of onsens, because they're afraid Yakuza are going to come in. Number one, the Yakuza has become almost obsolete. They're almost totally died out at this point. After Yamaguchi broke up and splintered into a 10-cell unit, pretty much the only people left with tattoos are a few ochans as far as gang-related tattoos are concerned. In America or any other country with tattoos, you should not assume someone who is tattooed is gang-related. Never been in a gang in my life, got a lot of tattoos. Almost all my friends, tattoos, no gangs. Just if you observe the tattoo and there's something you really like about it, just let them know. Bring down your onsen signs that say no people with tattoos admit it. Tattoos do not bleed off into the water. They do not start to come off the skin and turn the water black. It's not like Fatal Frame Part 3. So you don't need to worry about that, Japan. It's okay. Let them into swimming pools. Don't make them wear long sleeves into swimming pools. In America, we actually just swim in a bathing suit. We don't put like a full wetsuit on to go swimming like they do in Japan. I mean, it's kind of crazy sometimes for me. I understand. It's just Japanese tradition. It's cool. I would say if you are a business owner that has a collab with a lot of businesses, for example, Rakuten, who's got like a ton of eateries, and Ryokan, Japanese style hotels underneath your list, I would go through and check to make sure none of those are saying no gaijin admitted. I realized in the past there has been times where that's happened because a lot of times if they're close to a place where Russian boats land, there's been times where Russians have caused problems for them, Russian sailors. But for the most part, the people coming over are not going to be Russian sailors. I think Russia wasn't even allowed to join the Olympics this time, if I'm correct. I think if they do join, they have to join it as an individual and not representing their country. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but just a little bit of advice. Last but not least, you shouldn't assume anybody can speak Japanese. English is the official international language, and I realize this is your country and we should speak your language. That is totally true. If it were any other event or time, I would say, yes, people need to learn Japanese if they're going to live here. But none of these people are living here. They're all going to be either coming for the Olympics as an audience member or as a competitive member. And they're going to be ready with English. Even those European people that come, a lot of the Spanish people that come, English is going to be the language that they first try to go to use. No one's going to study up just to stay a couple of months and watch the Olympics. And that's understandable. I think you really need to get into educating any of the representatives of Japan that you're going to have interacting with people. I think you need to have those people learn some actual slang, street talk, casual talk. Don't get into this whole keigo thing, this polite talk. No one says, hello, what is your name? Hi, I am Nantoka Nantoka. No one says, long time no see. Okay, that's just not manners of speech we use much anymore. What's up? How's it going? How have you been? These are more natural. Try to learn more natural English. If you need to, bust out with a couple gaijin to teach around. Try to get the word out there. You've got a couple years still. You still got 2 years left until the Olympics are around. Maybe just try to hire a couple more English speakers to teach a couple more classes, even if it's only temporary. Some people are fine with only spending 6 months in Japan. China did this, and they seem to have done pretty well with the Olympics when they went there. They hired a bajillion English teachers to try and get a better grasp on the English language for all the gaijin that were coming over, and it worked out pretty well. Japan, you might want to think about doing some of the same stuff. Your knowledge of the English language is still archaic at this point, and a lot of the words that you even do use are not, I guess, the social norm anymore. You're still teaching very, very old, like 1950s English, and oftentimes you guys don't even realize, like, when you're using a word that's not English. For example, pan is not English for bread. Bread is bread, okay? Arbeito is not a part-time job in English. Those things need to be found out and discovered so that it's basic knowledge amongst the Japanese people. I realize in our own countries we don't have everything down pat as far as how Japanese works, but really only one country uses that, so there's a reason behind it. These are just a few suggestions. I'm not slamming Japan. Japan is a great nation, okay? They're doing things pretty damn well with how low the crime content is here and how much the overall people are happy here. I guess they're still not doing a lot to accommodate people who are having children, which I don't know how that's going to handle the next 50 years. It might cut the entire population in half. But these are just some suggestions, Japan. These are some things that I've thought about personally that I'm like, man, I hope Japan gets better at this. Because honestly, my honest feeling is I want to see Japan represented really well during the 2020 Olympics. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I live here. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I've come to understand the Japanese world, and I would like to see Japan in a great light and come away with a great reputation after people come here. And I think Japan's in line to do that. I think Japan's in line to do that not only because they have the dedication, but also because when Japanese people go after studying something or learning something, they go at it hardcore. Like, the consequences seem dire if they don't get to study or focus or get really good at what they're into. You should definitely do that with English before the 2020 Olympics come around. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on interactions, communications, how being a gaijin can sometimes be a hindrance or a help, and how Japan could prepare for the 2020 Olympics. If you like what you saw here today, think about subscribing. If you do subscribe, think about turning on that bell. And if you could possibly give this a like, I would be very grateful to you. Until next time, I'm Unrested, aka Scott Ackerman. Have a great one.